First couple, Bram en Pico, PSV. Execution 6, 6, 7, 6.5. Synchronized 7, 8, 7, 7.5, 7. Couple number 2, Philippe and Emile. And execution 4.5, 5, 5.5, 5.5. Synchronized 6, 7, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Couple number 3, Nicolaus and Antanasius.
Amen.
Execution 7, 7, 6.5, 7. Synchronized 8, 8.5, 7.5, 8, 8. Team number 4, Razia en Renske, Aquarijn en PSV. Execution 5, 5, 6, 6. Synchronized 6.5, 6.5, 6, 7, 6.5. Team number 5, Petra and Chenya. Execution 7, 6.5, 6.5, 7. Synchronized 7.5, 7.5, 8, 8, 7.5. Couple number 6, Julita and Daniela. Where's the couple from Lithuania? Next couple, couple number 6, Frederik en Lise, Joop Santijn, DSZ. Execution 5, 5.5, 5, 5.5. Synchronized 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 6. Next team, Katsiarina and Julia. Execution 6.5, 6, 7, 6.5. Synchronized 7, 7, 7, 7, 7.5. Starting round 2, first divers Bram and Tigo. Execution 7, 6, 6, 5.5. Synchronized 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Philippe and Emile. Execution 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5.5. Synchronized 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 5.5. Nicolaas en Antanasius. Execution 7, 7, 6.5, 7. Synchronized 8, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 8. Next couple Razië en Renske. Execution 6, 6.5, 6, 6. Synchronized 7, 7, 6, 7, 7. Next couple, Petra and Chenke. Execution 4.5, 5.5, 6, 6. Synchronized 7, 7, 6, 7.5, 7. Frederik en Lise. Execution 6.5, 5, 5.5, 5.5. Synchronized 1, 2.5, 1, 1.5, 1. Next couple, Katerina and Julia. Execution 5.5, 6.5, 6, 5.5. Synchronized 6.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. Starting round 3, first divers Bram and Tigo. Execution 5.5, 6, 5, 4.5. Synchronized 6.5, 7, 6.5, 6.5, 7. Philippe en Emil. Execution 4, 4, 3.5, 2.5, synchronized 5, 5, 4, 4.5, 3. Nicolaus en Ignatius. Execution 7, 7, 7, 6.5. Synchronized 8, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 6.5. Razia en Renske. Execution 6.5, 6, 5.5, 6. Synchronized 7, 7, 6, 6.5, 7. Petra en Czech. Execution 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5.5. Synchronized 6.5, 7, 6, 6, 6. Frederik en Lise. Execution 5, 5.5, 5, 5.5. Synchronized 4.5, 5, 4, 5, 5. Katsiarina en Julia. Execution 5, 6, 5, 5.5. Synchronized 5.5, 6, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5. Starting round 4, first divers, Bram en Tico. Execution 2.5, 4, 4, 3.5. Synchronized 4.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5. Philippe en Emile. Execution 4.5, 5.5, 4.5, 4.5. Synchronized 6, 6, 5.5, 6, 6.5. Nicolaus en Athanasius. Execution 7, 6.5, 2, 2.5. Synchronized 5.5, 5.5, 4.5, 5.5, 4.5. Razia en Renske. Execution 4, 4, 6, 6.5. Synchronized 6.5, 6, 6, 6, 6. Petra and Czech. Execution 6, 5.5, 5.5, 6. Synchronized 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 6. Frederik and Lise. Execution 4, 4.5, 5, 5. Synchronized 5, 5.5, 5, 4, 5.5. Katsiarina and Julia. Execution 4.5, 4.5, 2, 2.5. Synchronized 5.5, 5.5, 4.5, 5.5, 5. Starting last round of this competition, round 5, first couple, Bram and Pico. Execution 2, 3.5, 6.5, 5.5. Synchronized 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 6.5. Philippe and Emile. Execution, all judges 5.5, synchronized 5.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5, 6. Sorry. Nicolaas and Athanasios. Execution 7, 6.5, 6, 6, synchronized 7, 7, 7, 6, 6. Razia en Renske. Execution 6.5, 6, 5, 6, synchronized 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7.5. Petra and Chenge. Execution 5.5, 6, 4, 4.5, synchronized 6, 7, 6, 5.5, 6.5. Frederik and Lise. Execution 5, 5.5, 5.5, 6, synchronized 4.5, 3, 5.5, 5.5, 4.5. Katsiarina and Julia. Execution 7.5, 7, 6.5, 6, synchronized 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. It's the end of the competition. Thanks to divers, judges and secretary. Next competition will start